Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The wife decided to have a second life while the husband was at work. Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. It all started 5 years ago when I accidentally founded a village that we called Circumstance. It was not part of any municipality, and 349 people live there now. I'm lucky. I just unloaded another trailer in Texas with a brand-named medical bandage that needed to be sterilized before shipping to retail. I called the dispatcher and said that everything was ready. The dispatcher gave me a loading order that would allow me to get home 2 days early. Since I had a dangerous goods license, I was one of the few people who could do the job. The pickup point was only half an hour away, so off I went, refueling along the way. I immediately set off as soon as the cargo was loaded. The unloading point was only an hour's drive from home. I was en route when I confirmed that the cargo was fully loaded. This cargo was paid at twice the standard rate. Instead of following a predetermined route, I took a route across the country, cutting not only the miles but also the time. I was now only 2 hours from home, 5 to 6 hours ahead of schedule. When I stopped at the intersection of two rural roads, I saw a handwritten sign for sale before county pickup. The arrow pointed to the right, and I followed it. 2 signs along the way led me to a farmer's yard. They were an elderly couple who had retired due to age. I guess they were already in their 70s. Their lands were leased to farmers in the area, but rising prices caused them to fall behind on taxes. They loved their farm and didn't want to sell it and move to the city, so they had to sell some of the land. I called my father, who took matters into his own hands. Using a family trust, we purchased the farm at fair market value and provided them with a long-term lease on the house at a low cost. They were thrilled about it and told me that if I ever needed help, I should call them. I asked my father to set aside in separate 10 acres at the crossroads from the original 200 acres of the farm. It was an ideal location to build a convenience store and gas station since the nearest major city was about an hour away. As soon as I left, I invited my father to come and look at the place and try to buy the neighboring plots around the intersection as cheaply as possible. He did, and somehow we ended up with 10 acres on each corner of the intersection. While searching for water, my father discovered that there was an underground river running through the farm that could provide water for 50,000 people. He decided to use it to supply water to our new commercial property. As soon as I arrived to unload, the dispatcher urgently gave me another order, which I happily accepted. In the end, I returned home at the usual time. 6 months later, I dropped the load at 5 a.m. on a Wednesday, 12 hours ahead of schedule, and parked the truck and trailer in the company lot, picking up the keys to my old repainted Ford from the dispatcher's office. I knew I would soon face prosecution for violating state and federal driving time laws. Due to a breakdown, I was on the road for 16 days, so I tried to get home as quickly as possible. This meant that the person who replaced me got an extra 2 days off. The cabin was due to be sent for inspection and would be ready for use in a couple of hours. They wanted to make sure it was repaired properly. The other driver had to be informed to come to work. He was supposed to be on the road by 9 o'clock in the morning. I told my wife I'd be home for dinner. Marcy had already picked up the kids and was eagerly waiting for me. Some time ago, I pulled the engine out of an old Ford because it was out of order, and I was restoring the body and frame in my spare time since the interior was still in good condition. Before my last voyage, I prepaid a local paint shop to paint every piece of metal inside and out. When they finished assembling the interior, they had to call Jameson's Auto Repair to come and pick it up. After installing the new engine and checking everything that needed to be done, Jameson left the keys with the dispatcher, knowing that I would pay as soon as I got home. The paint made the old truck look like new. The old red truck was now completely black as midnight, even the bumpers sparkled with new chrome. The lettering on the backside read Ford in white, just like the original. Now I could get collector car plates on it if I wanted. I arrived home 10 hours early and thought it would be a pleasant surprise for my wife. She didn't start work until 9 o'clock, so I started the truck and drove home. I was looking forward to seeing my wife and our 2 daughters after 16 days on the road. It was almost 8 in the morning when I drove down our street to our house and found a car in our yard that shouldn't have been there. I immediately realized whose car it was. It was the pride and joy of the youngest son of the owner of our transport company. When I was on the road, he would rest since we shared the same cabin. We were complete opposites in many ways. He had a reputation as the black sheep of the family. Most truck drivers knew him as an incredible braggart with a big mouth. I stopped on the side of the road and just watched. I wanted to know why he was at our house and where my wife's car was. My heart broke as I saw my wife Marcy and Jack Reading walk out of the house with our children in front. In his right hand was a driver's bag, which always contained the basic things needed on the road. Apparently, the girls had missed the school bus, so they were going to be dropped off. I videotaped them all using my cell phone. I caught Marcy and Jack in a loving embrace behind the children before they put the two kids in the car. This clearly showed that what was happening had been going on for quite some time. Marcy and Jack didn't seem concerned about being seen together. They looked like an ordinary happy family. They drove past me without noticing who I was. I realized my wife no longer recognized my restored truck, and since I was not supposed to be home, she did not look for me. I watched them in the rearview mirror as they turned the corner. I moved into our 3-bedroom home and prepared to see what else I could find. I discovered that our 2 children's bedrooms were the same as they had always been. So was our master bedroom. My wife's clothes were in their place, as were mine. Even our bed was made, which was a bit unusual because the kids missed the bus. So far, nothing seemed out of place. If they had spent the night together, where were the remnants that would have provided me with the documentary evidence I now believed I needed? If they weren't involved, there would be no reason for him to be here. I went through everything twice, but my gut still told me to keep looking. There was nothing suspicious in the basement. The dishwasher was full of dirty dishes and needed running. That's when I noticed a bit of light shining under the door to the unfinished 3rd floor. I thought it was funny because it shouldn't have happened. We hung old curtains and kept them closed. It became something of an attic where we put things we no longer used. I hadn't been there for many years. My first thought was that Marcy was there for some reason and forgot to turn off the light. Curiosity got the better of me, and I needed to find out why there was light coming from under the door. I walked up the stairs and opened the door to find that the entire floor was now completely finished. I was shocked. The morning light came because someone left the curtain open. When I was at home, they were always closed. The problem was that it wasn't even supposed to start because my loving wife Marcy and I couldn't agree on what to do about it. Now I know why. Why was this room finished, and who used it came to my mind. It had its own master bedroom larger than mine and my wife's downstairs, huge walk-in closets on either side of the master bathroom, and a separate sitting area with its own TV and DVD player. Around the room on the coffee table was a handmade card that said, "We love you, Uncle Jake," signed by my 2 children. I felt sick. My fears were justified. Not only was he my wife's lover, but it seemed they were trying to take my children away from me. The king-size bed was unmade, and there were new linens on the floor that I had never seen before, which meant she was in a hurry this morning. The bedroom smelled of stale intim. As I looked around the closets, I discovered that one side was filled with men's clothing, which I assumed must have been his because they were definitely too big for me. The other contained more women's clothing, which I recognized as belonging to my wife. There were some very cute evening dresses hanging there that she never wore for me. I no longer had any doubts, Marcy and Jack were lovers. I began to see that she had another side to her personality that she didn't allow me to see. This clearly showed that, in her eyes, I was always her second choice. What did my children know about all this? Using my cell phone, I took a video of everything I discovered. I put a lot of effort into holding his shirt and getting a picture of me with it in the mirror to prove that it was too big for me. What caught my attention was the framed photo of him with his mother and father. I wrote down all the details about the room in detail, then I stopped and saved the recording. Going down to the basement, I grabbed our 3-piece luggage set and started packing all my clothes. After some thought, I went back to the 3rd floor to get a disc containing a crudely filmed recording of their night. I packed it in one of my suitcases. When I was done, I placed them by the front door. I'll come back for them later. I had a few more important things to do. I called my father and asked how soon we could open a new store. He said he's already building it with a 2nd floor for a 3-bedroom apartment. I'm looking for a regional manager to oversee overall management, he said. The chain I work with has given us a franchise that will really help us a lot. It will take another month and a half to complete the work and then another month to set it all up. While I do this, Dad, and live in the apartment, find me a good civil and divorce lawyer, I said. I would talk to him a little later to give him the details of what was going on. I called the farmer we bought the farm from and asked if I could rent a room from him until the construction was completed. No matter how hard I tried, he refused to accept any money because he believed that he and his wife owed a big debt to my family. I said that I would come by the next day at 10 o'clock in the morning. The next day, I was at the transportation center, sitting in the boss's office, announcing that I was quitting without the usual notice. He just had to ask me why, and I really didn't like telling him. I showed him the video footage of the room as a whole, and then the photographs I took later. The last one had a framed photo of his wife and his son, Heath. "Where did you get this?" asked Jace. I explained that this was the third floor of my house, and it had not yet been completed. His face was as white as freshly fallen snow. Jace, a Christian, looked at it and said, "Oh my God, this is disgusting." He called the accountant to write his last check and add a $10,000 bonus for what his son did. "Don't tell anyone and come to my office as soon as possible." "Are his children yours?" Jace asked seriously. "They both look like Marcy," I replied. "I think that's true because I don't think this affair lasted for a long time," I answered. "We've heard this for a long time, Heath," Jace Reading said. "The only way to find out is to do a DNA test." "I suggest you ask your son Jack about this," I said sadly. "Please don't tell anyone anything. I want Marcy to find out for herself tonight that I know what's going on." "Just so you know, Heath Cummings, I do not approve of what my son did," Jace said solemnly. "Now I'm really sorry that he did this to such a good person like you. I never knew he moved into your house," he continued, "but both of your works made it easy to understand how it could go on for so long without anyone knowing about it." Much later, I learned that Jace had kept his word. He not only fired him but also excluded him from his will because he brought disgrace to the family by ruining another man's marriage. What Jace couldn't handle was one of his longtime and trusted employees. For him, this showed that his own son did not care about anything or anyone. After cashing the check, clearing all of our shared accounts, and paying the bill at Jameson's car, I went to my kids' elementary school. After a long conversation with the counselor, the children were called out of class to talk to me. She started to walk away to give us some privacy. "Maybe it will be better if you stay. I don't want to be in a position where I can be accused of trying to manipulate our children," I said. She asked if I was sure about this. "In this case, yes, because my wife Marcy is a state social worker," I replied. There was a look of shock in Miss Connor's eyes. I learned that their new uncle Jake had been renting the top floor for 3 years. At first, he kept his distance, but over time, he seemed to become part of the family. Marcy introduced him as a distant relative who had just moved back to the area. Although they had never caught them together, they had seen Mom regularly coming down from the 3rd floor in the morning, so they assumed they were sleeping together. Mom eventually demanded that we start calling him Uncle. Linda said, "I told them straight out that he had nothing to do with any of us." My daughters' faces showed shock. I explained calmly that it seemed Jack had been their mother's longtime lover. As a result, we will get divorced. Since I'm a truck driver, I explained that there was no way I could get primary custody, which meant they would have to stay with my mother until I found a new job. I then went to court to try to get sole custody of them. The school counselor said that what I explained was true. I kissed my daughters goodbye and watched them walk back to class. The school counselor gave me her name and phone number. "Have your lawyer contact me so I can testify if necessary," she said. "I've seen too many cases where married men find themselves in difficult situations during divorce." I went into a flower shop and asked for a bouquet of the most wilted flowers they had. I had to explain that it was a joke gift before they agreed to do it. One of the employees went outside and brought some from the trash. "Will these fit?" she asked. I said they were perfect. She packed them for me. When I got home, I placed them on our master bed along with a card that my daughters signed for Uncle Jake. I loaded the tools I wanted to keep into the back of my truck. After loading the suitcases, I covered them with a tarp to hide what I was carrying and began to pull it tight. The instruments themselves cost a lot of money. The neighbor, or real friend named John Seath, came over and said, I guess you didn't know about Marcy's second husband, like we all thought, John said. Second husband? I asked in surprise. Basically, yes, John said. It was a kind of sham marriage. I just found out about this today. This has been going on for at least 3 years. We worked for the same company. I left today because I want sole custody of my daughters. I need to prove to the court that I will be there for them every day, I said before continuing. He wasn't there when I drove the truck, so I had no way of knowing unless we were home at the same time, I explained. He's my boss's youngest son. His father found out today in the hardest way what was going on when I walked in and quit without warning. We talked some more, and he suggested that I pull out of the driveway and park the truck in his garage. He thought that by watching her tonight, it might give me an idea of how to plan my next steps. You could get up before dawn and leave in the dark, I thought for a few minutes before agreeing. I'm glad I did it. I watched my wife of 13 years of marriage pull into the driveway. I guessed that the car was being serviced. She immediately went to the bedroom to change out of her work clothes. She stopped when she saw what was lying on her bed. She smiled because she thought it was a surprise from Jack. Through the binoculars, I saw a smile of joy appear on her face. She took the baby's card to Uncle Jake and set it aside. Why did he do this now? There was concern on her face. Why did Jack put this in Heath's bedroom? I saw doubt appear on her face. Brushing away the remaining pieces of the flower box, she opened it. She was struck by the smell of 24 rotten red roses. I realized that she had not yet understood what I had learned. The confused expression on her face told me she didn't know what Jack was trying to say. I thought she might think Jack was ending their relationship. I watched as my 2 daughters got off the bus and walked towards the front door of the house. Lauren texted me, "We're calling you, but don't answer by voice. We want you to hear what we tell Mom." I explained to our neighbor John what was about to happen. When I put it on speaker, "We have to be quiet," I said, "so we can hear everything." The girls immediately went to their mother's room, who was still trying to understand what I had done. She still didn't understand the message I sent. After greeting their mother as usual, my daughters began to speak. Linda began. I saw how my daughter attracted her mother's attention with just one look. We were called into the guidance counselor's office. We were confused as to why he was there. "You said he would be home around 6. Then he asked Miss Connor to stay," Lauren added. "The first thing he asked us was who Uncle Jack was and how long he had been a part of our home," Linda said. I saw the fear on Marcy's face. Now she knew who left the message on the bed. "Dad didn't know you finished the 3rd floor while he was on the road," Lauren said. "You told us it was a surprise for him," Lauren revealed. "Now we understand that this is not so. We kept your secret, and oh my God, how unexpected it was for Dad," Linda added. "He told us he didn't know the floor was finished until he saw it today," Lauren said. "Mom, you taught us not to lie, but apparently it's okay for you to lie to everyone in the family." Tears began to flow from Marcy. "Dad didn't know that Uncle Jack had been renting the 3rd floor from us for over 3 years, Linda said. "We had to explain to him that while he was at work, you never slept in the bed that you and Dad slept in when he was home," Lauren pointed out. Marcy's face turned pale. Her own daughters exposed her for her own behavior. The simplest thing like making a bed became her downfall. She always insisted that the girls make their beds before starting the day. "We admitted to Dad that we never caught you with Uncle Jack, but we told him that we saw you regularly coming down from the 3rd floor in the morning when he wasn't home," Lauren explained. "Dad said he and you will be getting a divorce because Jack isn't related. He's your mom's long-term lover that she hid from me," Dad said. "My wife and your mother used me for a long time to support him in this lifestyle that they themselves created only to satisfy the needs of your mother and him and not for the good of us all. That tells me that my life with her was just a lie," Linda added. Connor explained later that Dad had no choice but to quit his job because the court wouldn't give custody to a truck driver. "After he said goodbye, we went back to class," Linda continued. Marcy sat on the bed crying, trying to maintain control. She knew the girls were telling the truth. Heath took the right step in preparing for the fight ahead. Since she was a social worker, he was well aware of what the state would be looking at when making a judgment. We ended up crying, so the school counselor took us out of class for the rest of the day, Linda said. We talked for a long time about everything as she tried to calm us down. We learned that cheating in marriage is adultery, Mom, Len said. Miss Connor said it was the biggest insult married people could give each other. It doesn't seem to bother you, otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it, Linda said. Miss Connor wondered why you thought you could live so long with 2 husbands. Marcy was devastated and just sat and cried. When her daughters expressed this, their words were strong and cut her like a knife. Her own behavior forced her daughters to grow up. Right before we got on the bus, Miss Connor asked us if we were emotionally ready to take the bus, and if not, she would be happy to take us home, I said. We'd be fine, because it would give us time to talk, Linda said. Connor told us that she would testify to what she heard today if asked in court, she said. She said she had no choice because she had seen too many men destroyed by the lies of others. Lauren added. We whispered to each other a lot during the bus ride and decided a few things on our own, Linda said. Marcy completely lost control and covered her face with her hand. Mom, we may only be 12 years old, but we will soon reach an age where we can decide for ourselves who of you we want to live with, Miss Connor explained. At the age of 13, we can decide for ourselves who we want to live with, and that will be Dad, Lauren said decisively. We're going to call Grandma to come and get us. I'm sure she'll let us stay with her and Grandpa until Dad gets things sorted out. That way, you and Jack can have the whole house to yourself, Lauren said. Come on, sister, we need to call Grandma and pack some things. Mom, the last question, were you deliberately trying to get us to accept your relationship with Uncle Jake so that we could more easily accept him as your second husband without our father knowing? Linda asked because we think that's what happened. Marcy was devastated. She just sat and cried while her daughters went to call their grandmother who lived across town. The daughters had their father's natural insight. They looked at everything with straightforward logic and drew their own conclusions. I wrote Marcy a message. What you found on the bed, I did let your part-time husband know that I will sue him for joint maintenance of you and 2 children. I watched through binoculars as she realized that when I brought her relationships, lies, and secrecy to court, she would lose all rights to her daughters. Marcy realized she had failed. There was no happy ending to this. If Heath sues and exposes Jack, it will ruin them both, John and I timed it. Less than 15 minutes passed before my relatives appeared. John opened the front door just to see if voices could be heard. They did, so because the voices were so loud, you would think they were shouting. My mother-in-law gave Marcy a good beating as she walked her granddaughters out the front door, but it was my father-in-law who put everything in order in a way that left no doubt about how he felt about the whole situation with his daughter. I think you'll cut Heath out of your life as soon as things work out between you and Jack. You'll be looking for another truck driver to replace Heath, my father-in-law said in pure anger. You have made it clear by your behavior that one man will never be enough to satisfy your intimate needs. John and I could see that Marcy was devastated by her father's words. She cried so much that she could not speak. We will contact Children's Services in the morning to find out how to handle this situation, Marcy's mother said. In the end, it was our granddaughters who contacted us and told us why they wanted to leave this house. I'm very proud of them. Someone clearly raised them correctly, and unfortunately, we can't say it was you. John closed the door, walked into the kitchen, and grabbed a couple of cold beers. I followed him. Your daughter's got the situation right, Heath. You should be proud, John said. To be honest, when the construction crew was working, Marcy told us you needed money and you were going to rent out the 3rd floor. They paid for the house and land. I just took my time because we didn't need it, I explained. I rebuilt the house from the ground floor, so she lied to us from day one. She and Jack planned it all. So where did the money come from? Asked John. Because we haven't made a penny of revenue since day one on this so-called rental unit, I said. I'm guessing the money came from Jack's trust fund, and he paid it back. I pulled out my cell phone, clicked on Marcy's name in my contacts list, and hit send. John, let me know if you spot Marcy. I want to send a message, and I need to tell her what her response is. A couple of minutes later, he said he found her and she returned to her bedroom and seemed to have calmed down. I sent it. It was short. It said, "Hey, To anyone calling Jace reading, and I want to know, since your relationship with his son lasted a long time, whether Linda and Lauren are mine or his. Jace is going to file a lawsuit to try to find out. Oh my God, she lost consciousness. She threw the phone at the wall, said John. Right now, she's face down on the bed, crying hysterically. J.N. returned to the kitchen and smiled. What did you write to her? I just said that Jace reading, and I wanted to know if Linda and Lauren were Jack's or mine, I replied. Jace told me that rumors had been circulating for years that his son was dating a married woman and her husband didn't know anything. As a result, I asked a question that needed to be answered by all concerned. John's face turned pale. He knew Reading's reputation. Jace will go all the way to the Supreme Court to find out. I waited half an hour and asked John to watch Marcy again. She was sitting on the sofa in the living room. I sent her a 5-minute clip that I recorded from the TV, which ended up showing the face of the man she cheated on me with. Who filmed this? I waited a minute and then sent a text. I took the disc. When I look, maybe I'll find out, John said. Marcy lost her temper again. I don't want to know what you said or did. I left at 5 in the morning, setting off after yesterday, sending everyone we knew, friend or foe. What I showed Jace reading when he asked why I had to quit, the second video was also originally filmed on the same floor as the bedroom with the help of someone else. Neighbors openly said that Jack Reading was Marcy's second husband. Marcy told the neighbors that I agreed to this. This is not true. I found out about this yesterday and am planning to file for divorce and sue Jack Reading for many reasons. For most, this will not be a good start to their day. I stopped at a friendly gas station on the outskirts of town and ordered myself a trucker's breakfast. I parked my truck so I could see it from my box window while I ate. I'm sorry, Heath. No one deserves what happened to you, said Morin, Marcy's little sister. Can I join? I nodded my head in agreement, and she sat down opposite me. I drank the hot coffee slowly. Mom and Dad told me about it last night. The girls told them everything as soon as they got them home, so you know. It took us all by surprise, Morin explained. Please, if you change your phone number, let us know so we won't give it to Marcy. The phone number will remain the same, Morin, I said. I was planning on leaving in 2 months anyway because my girls are growing up, and I wanted to be home in the evenings as they begin their active teenage years. What was my sister thinking, said Morin. There's no way in hell you would ever agree to Marcy having a second husband. I guess we'll never know, I replied. Perhaps it started as an innocent friendship but gradually went too far. Either way, as far as I know, she liked it. Apparently, it lasted much longer than the 3 years we learned about. What do you mean? Morin asked. Jace Reading, when I explained why I was leaving, told me that there had been rumors that his youngest son had been seeing a married woman for years, I explained. He asked if Linda and Lauren were Jack's daughters. Damn. Who else knows? She asked. I opened Marcy's text messages and let her read what I sent her last night. Then I showed her what I sent this morning, I said. When she finished reading, she had to wipe away her tears. What she knew just got worse. According to the video, there was another person involved in their relationship. By the end of the day, everyone will know, I said. Jace will make this public in his search for the truth. It may turn out that both girls are mine or both are Jack's, or maybe neither of us is their biological father. Now I wonder if the person who took the video was a man or a woman. Morin must have seen the tears in my eyes because she stood up and walked over to me just to hold my hand. We were silent until the waitress took our order. Finally, I had to let go of her hand so I could eat. Heath and Marcy married at 19. She was the youngest of the bridesmaids, but even at that age, she was in love with him. She always thought that he was so handsome then and remained just as handsome. He worked as a truck driver so that Marcy could continue her studies at the university. When she graduated and got a job in the civil service, she was offered 3 or 4 jobs, but she chose the one in her hometown. Now she knew why it was so important to be close to her first love, Jack, whom her parents had never approved of. Morin looked at Heath and felt that he could not handle this. Now, when Heath was home, she spent as much time with them as she could. Heath was an honest man who always treated her as an equal. When she had difficulties, she turned to him. He taught her to look at situations from all sides, making her big problems seem like small things. It wasn't difficult for her to fall in love with him. It was so real to her that every man who tried to court her after that had to live up to the standards he set. Her parents wanted her to get married, but Morin couldn't tell them that she loved someone else and always had. He was a faithful man who never looked at other women. She just needed to find a way to keep Heath in her life. Now, when the time comes, she will make her move and prove to him forever that he married the wrong sister, Morin asked. Heath, do you know where you'll be living? Linda and Lauren asked Mom and Dad to take them in. They are angry, upset, and determined but so proud of their dad. The girls told Mom and Dad they would tell the court they wanted to live with you, she said. Mom and Dad explained to them that you are doing what is right for the long term. I can bring them to your place for the weekend so you can see them if you want. I opened my notes and gave her the address of the farm my dad and I started building a gas station and convenience store next to this place. I'll be living with a tenant of the farm we own, I said. I'll have to talk to them first before I can answer your question. We're building a large 3-room apartment upstairs that I'll live in. Why there? Morin asked. We own 10 acres on either side of the intersection that we plan to subdivide and sell as 3/4 acre lots once we develop them, I explained. We can take more land from the farm if necessary. There is nothing in the area, so the store will be a convenient and attractive location for many. How did you find this? Morin asked. According to Google Maps, there is nothing nearby. I was driving across the country to save time, I explained. There was a lot of traffic on the road. I noticed the sign at the intersection and followed it. The flow of traffic will keep the business going. After we finished our meal, I paid the bill. Morin leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, as she always did. This made me smile. Keep that in mind, Heath, Morin said. Many of us have always loved you for who you are. As I was driving, I called my father and told him everything. He said he would find me one of the best divorce lawyers. I noted the mileage to where I was going. It was only 75 miles. It was a little after 8:30 when I arrived at the construction site. I smiled when I saw this because Dad did everything big. There will be 8 pumps for cars and small trucks and 2 for large trucks. On the right, pits were dug and block frames were ready to begin. The spill collection system in case the tanks started to leak. The floor and concrete needed for steel support were laid. I walked into the construction trailer and saw the design my father was putting together. It was the same as all his previous ones, except for the 2,400 square foot apartment upstairs. I smiled too because it meant he saw the potential of the area. About 2 hours later, I went to the farm. Bill Robinson came out to meet me. He really liked my old restored Ford truck. These were times when speed, weight, and hard metal were at a premium, Bill called her. Cooked a typical farmer's lunch, and she was delighted with how much I ate. After lunch, I started helping her clean up. While she was cleaning up the leftover food, I started washing the dishes. She noticed that I no longer wore my wedding ring. By the time I dried the dishes and she put them away, a fresh pot of coffee was ready. I spent the next 2 hours talking about how the last 2 days had gone. Bill said the girls and their aunt would be quite welcome here. It will be good to have young people around again. It gives me someone to grill something for. I texted Morin and told her she could come every Friday night and leave on Sunday. She replied that it was a date. On Thursday afternoon, I watched the disc on my laptop. There was no other face visible in the entire shoot. Using my cell phone as a Wi-Fi hotspot, I texted my dad everything, including Mrs. Connor's address and phone number. I told him to contact Chase Reading to find out where Jack would be and when and give him a summons as soon as possible. Marcy could be taken to the social services office in town. I even sent a video file downloaded from the disc out of pure spite. I sent a message to Marcy saying that I had watched the entire video and that it was nothing special. Other servants would have done a better job. Morin was a tax professional, and luckily this was the slowest part of the year. As soon as the girls left school, they hit the road. She had to laugh as they texted their dad every 10 to 15 minutes. The 75 miles of road seemed to go by quickly. When they reached the construction site, they sent one last message. They drove down the road until they saw him standing at the end of the driveway. Linda and Lauren jumped out of Lauren's car and ran into my arms. Bill and Mrs. were introduced. I finally found out her name was Betty. The girls loved the room Betty had prepared for them. Bill showed everyone to their rooms while Betty finished preparing a huge dinner. When we finished dinner, I started cleaning up. Betty watched my daughters and me wash the dishes so she could put them away. Bill told the girls about a big swing, a swimming pond, and small motorcycles that they could learn to ride if I gave permission. I was worried about what they would do, but Bill and Betty already had a plan. After the kids went to bed, Maureen and I were able to talk. "Heath, it's been a crazy couple of days with everything coming out," Maureen said. "It all started when she was secretly dating Jack while we were growing up. That's how long they were together. That explains a lot. I was safe and reliable. Jack was the wild side she secretly desired. She didn't know he knew it and used it to his advantage. Jack would run away and leave Marcy with what she deserved, nothing. Mom and Dad have talked to social services, and if you give them written permission, they can keep them until you find a place," Maureen explained. They also spoke with the children privately, and after that, we were all told that due to Marcy's lifestyle, she could not be recommended to get custody. Maureen looked at me and saw tears on my cheeks. It finally dawned on me. I told her to leave and let me deal with it, but she refused and stayed with me. Marcy sat at the kitchen table, thinking about the last 2 days. Thursday was a quiet day. Today was everything except that. Jace Reading served her a subpoena while she was at work. He sued. He wanted to know if there was a direct DNA link between her daughters and him. In truth, so many years had passed since the twins were conceived that she could no longer remember. Heath warned her of the upcoming fight, but after the initial shock, she brushed it off, thinking he was just angry. But what really knocked her off her feet was Heath's message to all their friends and family. She had never seen Jack as her second husband, but today, as she learned from the lawyer, he legally was. From the day she moved Jack into her home, they were practically married legally. After the first year, they had the same legal rights as legal spouses. As a result, when Heath sues Jack, he will likely win. The only question is how much he can get, the lawyer said. Heath would be treated very favorably in divorce court because he had been wronged for a long time. If she had collected rent for the past 3 years and could prove it with monthly bank statements, the situation might be different. But since there was no evidence of his contribution to household expenses, the court will consider him a maintenance worker. It was at the close of the day that the last bomb exploded. Her boss called her into the office, and it all sorted out. On Thursday evening, she went after work to the home of Mr. and Mrs. Claus Rubenstein regarding a custody matter. At their request, they explained what happened the night before and asked for government recommendations for the future. After talking with the children, I told the grandparents that if they received written permission from the father to care for the children, we would accept them as temporary guardians until the matter was resolved. "I know they're your parents," her boss said to Marcy. "I can't transfer you now, but as soon as a position becomes available, I will. I can't fire you or kick you out, but your effectiveness as a social worker in this area has been exhausted. No one will take anything you say seriously, so you are permanently transferred to an office job, and you must hand over your current affairs to others," she said with disgust. Marcy realized that it was all her fault. It was her choice and her choice alone to continue pursuing Jack. She was now beginning to realize that all actions have consequences. It was a busy Saturday, and Linda and Lauren were full of energy. It was funny listening to him explain to my daughters the do's and don'ts of the little motorcycles that were parked nearby. It was amazing to see how they got used to it after 2 hours. Bill said that was enough for today because their bodies would ache and ache considering that they were sweating. He said, "Go take a dip in the pond for a quick refreshment." Betty and Maureen grew closer to each other. At about 4 o'clock, the girls were called to help prepare part of the dinner. I had to keep an eye on them because it was something they had never done before. 4 women sat at the kitchen table, chopping onions for 2 courses and peeling hot-boiled potatoes for potato salad. Bill began heating up his barbecue, preparing to fry the steaks he had defrosted. I helped him wherever I could. We ate steaks, potato salad, and baked beans outdoors at a picnic table. It was interesting that neither the TV nor their cell phones were used once all day. It was like the twins were discovering a whole new life for themselves. These were girls who decided to go to bed early because they were tired. The four of us sat and drank a few beers while playing cards until we decided to call it a night. On Sunday afternoon, they went home. Morin received a handwritten letter certified by Billy and Betty granting them the necessary permissions. Klaus Rubenstein called me early on Monday morning to thank me for returning the letter as quickly as possible. He personally took it to the office. The supervisor made a copy for their records and then gave him legal notice to show all concerned that they were the legal guardians of their granddaughters. The following Friday morning, Chase Reading was in Austin, Texas, picking up a shipment of sterilized medical equipment when he was served the subpoena. That same morning, as soon as the social services office opened, Marcy Cummings received a summons. I received a text message from Morin asking for my waist measurements. I asked why. She replied so that we could swim in the pond with the children. I answered 34. I was walking in the early afternoon when my cell phone notification sounded. It was a message from Marcy. It read, "Have you calmed down enough to talk?" I replied, "There's nothing to talk about. Your parents and Morin told me the whole story, from the secret meetings until now. What I'm trying to understand for myself is if he was always your one and only, why did you marry me?" No wonder I didn't get a response. I don't know who was more excited when Morin pulled up with the kids, the three of us or them. Morin looked amazing, her smile was contagious. After she hugged me, the girls quietly asked me a question, to which I answered yes, but only if they agreed. As they headed to greet Bill and Betty, Morin kissed me hard on the lips, taking me by surprise. I told Morin that she needed to hear the girls, so we turned towards them. One day, Morin put her hand in mine. We wanted to ask. Lauren began, "Can we call you grandparents?" Linda added. "Of course," they said. What surprised us was that Betty had tears in her eyes. We found out later that they never had children because she couldn't get pregnant. These simple words from my daughters were words she thought she would never hear in her life. After dinner, I showed Morin my last message from Marcy and my response. "You know my sister can't explain her actions," Morin said, "because if she does, she'll have to face the truth about herself." "Enough about your sister, Morin," I replied. "When will you find a man who can love you the way you deserve?" "Don't be surprised, but I've already found it," she replied. "My problem is making him realize it." Bill and I were early risers, so we sat outside enjoying freshly brewed coffee early in the morning. "Heath, Betty is my second wife," he said. "I was married for the first time to her sister, who did to me the same thing Marcy did to you." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Don't let your pain stop you from seeing what's in front of you. Morin has been there for you since day one. When you are ready, be sure to ask yourself why." That's when I started to get it. Morin was my best friend. Did she want more? If she did, why? "Bill, what made you realize that Betty is interested in you?" I asked. He held a cast iron frying pan overhead. He laughed. "After she caught the girl next door trying to flirt with me. Since we didn't have children of our own, we took in foster children for years. Our conversation ended because we heard voices as the rest of the family came to life. After the twins rode motorcycles for 3 hours, it was time for a swim, so we all went. Bill and Betty brought beach chairs to watch us play with the beach ball for a while. Morin looked stunning in her white bikini, her brown hair pinned back behind her ears. The way she walked barefoot caused her butt to wiggle slightly. I watched this as we walked to the pond. Bill made me look at her differently. The pond was deeper than I expected and was fed by a small stream. He created it using railroad ties on a low plot of land. As a result, it now has its own small waterfall. Our first game of beach volleyball involved 1 adult and 1 child, and then 2 girls against us. For the 4 of us, it was a time of laughter, sarcasm, and just plain fun. It was nice just to be us. Each of my daughters took turns asking me to dive under them and then lifting them up so they could dive off my shoulders. Finally, Bill and Betty said they were going to dinner. Linda and Lauren decided to go help them. I dove under the water and ended up between Lauren's legs, flipping her over. She laughed as her hair was completely wet. Looking into her eyes, I saw for the first time what they were showing without saying a word. I lowered my head to hers, and she raised hers to mine as we shared our first sensual kiss. I realized that there was more love in that kiss than I had ever had with Marcy. "Wow," I said. "That was incredible." Morin smiled and said, "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this." She came over so I could hug her tightly, our bodies pressed against each other. The water surrounded us up to our necks. Our mouths searched for each other in complete delight, our tongues explored each other's mouths, creating our own unique dance. We didn't pay attention to anything around us. We finally broke off when we heard Bill shout that dinner would be ready in 20 minutes. We interrupted the conversation and went back to get dressed for dinner. As soon as we entered the house, Betty understood everything. "It looks like everything is starting to work out," Betty said with a wide smile. "How did you enlighten him, Betty?" I asked. "She didn't tell Heath about your evil rites with the cast iron skillet," Bill said with a grin. The twins heard him say this, and he had to tell them the story of how they met. It was after dinner when the twins went to bed. The fresh air and being outside the city tired them out. I was sitting on the back porch on a soft swing when Morin came out and sat next to me. I hugged her as she leaned against me and said, "Mommy realized this when I brought the twins home last week to her." I seemed happier than at any time in recent years. I thought, "How did she take it?" I said, "There must be a lot of anxiety with everything that's going on." She asked, "Has it gotten to the point where something's going on?" Morin said, "I honestly told her no." Then she asked, "How long have you been in love with him?" I said, "Since the summer before they got married." "Wow, that's long, and I need to notice all of this," I said. "I expected a big lecture from her," said Morin. "Everything she said, if it works, I will make your father accept it." She then explained that our father was the outlier of her older sisters. She thanks her for that every day. On Sunday afternoon, I was kissing Morin goodbye when Lauren told Linda, who looked shocked, that Morin was in love with Dad for many years. It took what Mom did to Dad to understand this. If Morin has her way, they will get married as soon as he gets divorced. When they left, I asked, "How did my daughter know?" Bill said, "Let's go for a walk. I have an idea that I want to propose to you." We walked from the front of the property to the road, across a bridge that crossed a small stream. On the other side of the property, there was a beautiful piece of land that was originally part of the house grounds. "This would be the perfect place for a house, don't you think?" Bill said. "Whose idea was this?" I asked. "Betty and Morin early this morning," he laughed. "They're going to give you that idea next week." CLA called me on Monday morning. Jace Reading received a court order to take blood from Lauren and Linda. I explained to him what I knew. He was shocked to learn that there was a question about paternity. Until that moment, he believed that Marcy had simply been with him for the past 3 years. He was so upset by the revelation that he went into social services and told his daughter, in front of everyone, that he thought she was dead to him. I spoke with my mother-in-law, who informed me that Mrs. Connor had provided a notarized statement from my attorney. "Jack is due back in town on Wednesday. Don't you think you should be around to see what's going on?" "You could stay here," I told her. "I'll think about it." I called John Seath and asked if I could stay at his house on Tuesday night. He said sure because he had some news for me. Bill offered to take his car so that no one would find out. I agreed, but only if he took the truck and took his wife out into town for the day. Dusk had already fallen when I crept up to the city. I called John to make sure he was home before pulling into his driveway. It turned out that Marcy had another man visiting her at home, and he was there at that exact moment when I looked through John's binoculars. I immediately recognized the face. This was Jack's older, married brother. Jace Reading was surprised to hear from me. I told him he needed to see me and gave him the address where I was staying. When he arrived, I gave him the key to my house and told him he needed to see it with his own eyes to believe what I had discovered. I told him that I had discovered who was filming Jack and Marcy. They were together in a bedroom on the 3rd floor. John and I watched as he walked up to my front door. Using the key, he entered. "What do you think he'll do when he finds out who it is?" I asked John. Jace Reading is a proud man. It all depends on what his pride pushes him to do, I answered. I just hope it doesn't cause him to cross the line. We were sitting in the kitchen when we heard the sound of a gunshot. We feared the worst. John called 911. When the police, firefighters, and ambulance arrived, we went outside and watched. John and I couldn't stop laughing. We found it funny to see Marcy half without clothes and Jace and Jack in handcuffs. We were worried when we saw Jace Reading come out being carried on a stretcher. John took out the police scanner and set it up. We learned that Jace broke into the third-floor bedroom, and Jack shot him, thinking it was a home robbery. Jace was taken away with a shoulder injury. We walked outside to be noticed. When Marcy, now dressed, saw me from across the street, her face went white. Things got worse for her. John told me, I can't believe it. She was involved with both brothers. I knew there was a third person, but I didn't know who. I feel sorry for Jace, he doesn't deserve this. At 6 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, I arrived at Marcy's parents'. Klaus Rubenstein was already up and getting ready for the day. He opened the door before I got out of the car. Over coffee before anyone else got up, I told him what happened the night before. Rose, his wife, was surprised to see me but immediately hugged me tightly. It didn't take long before my daughters came down, already dressed. Both were excited to see me. Of course, I took them to school before returning to my mother-in-law's house. Klaus left for work. Rose and I talked for a long time about her daughters. We both came to the conclusion that Marcy never loved me. I went to visit Jace Reading, who was relaxing with his wife nearby. When she introduced me, she stood up and began to gasp. As I took her in my arms, Jace heard me tell her not to feel guilty about their kids being stupid. Jace smiled and said, "Heath always took things in his stride. One thing's for sure, I've never seen him lose his cool." "I've been close to this a few times," I said. "I thought if I ever lost control, I would kill someone." Jace laughed. "Jason is in jail, Jack is facing bankruptcy because he lost his trust, and we don't know what Jason's wife will do. It's a real mess. What about you? Do you want to come back as a manager?" I refused because, as I tried to explain, I had developed a new attitude towards life. I went to the transportation center and watched Jack check in and out for the last time. Jace told me he should arrive in about an hour. Watching him drive away in a rage was quite a spectacle. Knowing his hot temper, I called John Seath, asking him to keep an eye on my house as I expected trouble. Morin had just finished work when the receptionist entered her office. "A handsome gentleman has come for you with a dozen red roses," she said. "He wants to know if you would like to have dinner." Morin followed her, wondering who it could be. If I had any doubts about how Morin was feeling, they disappeared when she saw me. The tears that accumulated in her eyes expressed everything. I followed her to her apartment, and after she parked, we headed to Outback for their steak and shrimp special. We enjoyed their onion flowers while we had a couple of cocktails. As soon as we finished eating, John called. Jack arrived home before Marcy and was waiting for her. The alcohol he drank while he waited only added fuel to the fire. With his father in the hospital, his brother in jail, and the loss of his job, he came to the conclusion that it was all Marcy's fault. He was waiting for her with a gun in his hand when she walked through the door. A neighbor who heard the shots called the police. Marcy was in poor condition and was rushed to the emergency room. John said it didn't look good. I told Morin, who called her parents. We met them at the hospital. 6 hours later, we learned that she died on the operating table. Too much internal bleeding. I called Bill and his wife to let them know what was going on and that I would be driving back on Friday to return his car and pick up my truck. It was difficult to tell the twins about their mother's death. Klaus and I decided on a closed casket. When we chose it, it was hard to think that because of one person's behavior, the lives of 11 people were changed forever. No one ever thinks about the consequences of our actions. We were walking back from the burial site when Klaus pulled me aside. "Heath, there is no connection between Jace Reading and the kids," Klaus said quietly. "More importantly, how long has Morin been in love with you?" "According to your wife, from the summer before Marcy and I got married," I answered. "Did she also tell you that her sister left me over 35 years ago?" Claus said. I'm grateful for that every day. If things work out for you and Morin, you have my support. At that moment, I began to rebuild my life. 5 years have passed. I watched Linda and Lauren wait for the bus. Morin, my wife, is busy with our 2 preschoolers, both boys. Bill and Betty became meticulous grandparents. The gas station and convenience store became the center of the village. We now have our own mail. In warm weather, I walk from the house we built near the pond to work. Chase Reading and his wife stop by often. His eldest son's ex-wife lives here with her children. Jack received 10 to 25 years for manslaughter. Jason was given a suspended sentence. As for the name of our part of the world, it came about because Bill painted a sign that said, "We're all here because of circumstance," and placed it at an intersection. What do you think of our story today? I think my husband has suffered a lot in this story. What do you think? Write in the comments. See you in the comments.